After nearly 2 weeks of testimony, closing arguments are now underway in the trial of Brooks Houck and Joseph Lawson. Thanks so much for joining us for this midday update on WHAS 11+. I'm Brooke Hash. So far, we have heard from both defense teams. The prosecution will have its opportunity after lunch. And part of our team coverage now coming from Alexandra Goldberg today. Brooks Houck's team is presenting its closing arguments right now. What have we heard from so far?
Brooke, well, they actually just wrapped up. We're here in lunch break, but you're right. We are in the final stretch of trial number 2. Before I get into the specifics here about what Brian Butler said in closing arguments for Brooks Houck, I want to give you a better look at the tone inside of the courtroom. There was this tone that he spoke with while giving these closing arguments that he was almost appalled that they were even at trial anyways, so calling this case garbage on several occasions, almost acting as this sort of being able to tame this misinformation surrounding this trial. Now let's get into the specifics. He starts right off the gate saying, quote, Brooks Houck is not guilty. How many guesses do you get in a criminal trial? The answer is none. He said, it has been the government that guesses, that speculates. It's like playing whack-a-mole. Again, going in that theme of him trying to tame what the prosecution is trying to pick and present as their evidence. Now, what he does very early on in these closing arguments is he shows the sort of montage of different videos that he's collected throughout the trial, throughout police interrogations, different graphs that he's seen, and he plays them back to back and shows the jurors almost like this montage of clips trying to instill some doubt into the jurors so they could see any inconsistencies that have been said throughout the trial. So he shows clips from Charlie Girdley, from John Snow, even with Special Prosecutor Shane Young admitting that with the cadaver dog situation, he, quote, could have handled it better. Another clip that he played is Denver Butler saying that it's unlikely to not leave bodily fluid behind in a crime scene. He even gets loud again on one occasion saying that Young is trying to convict based on, quote, this garbage. Now, I want to get into a little bit here of the evidence and the witnesses. He brings up that Woodlawn Springs search where they found some women's clothing. They found 4 hairs as well, saying that none of those hairs nor the clothing could be connected to Crystal Rogers. He said that ever since the FBI took over this case in 2019, there's been an overriding directive to get Brooks Houck and to pin him in this case. He calls them marching orders that Kentucky State Police have been a part of, trying to get their evidence to fit into their narrative that Brooks Houck is guilty. Now, I want to briefly go through some of these witnesses and this evidence that he brings up. He brings up Christina Hawley, again, who is one of Crystal's friends who testified based on that surprise date night. He testifies that, that night that they went to the Houck family farm, it wasn't actually that rainy. He showed some witness testimony that were poking holes in that theory. Brings up Rogers playing games on her phone, said that that wasn't conclusive either. He goes back to back to back, pointing out these witnesses and where they could be wrong in their testimony. He says, quote, I truly don't know what the prosecutor is going to say because it is just a convoluted mess. Now, the last point that I'll bring up here has to do with that white Buick. We know that there were 3 raccoon hunters who testified, 2 saying that they saw a white Buick, 1 saying that they did not. Well, Brian Butler says, why did Nick and Anna Whiteside sell that white Buick? He says, well, they didn't want people to be suspicious of a white car that may have matched that description in that Facebook post. He also said that all evidence is seized, so grandma would have been out of a car. Brooke.
Kind of makes you suspicious either way with that scenario. Before Brooks' team began their arguments, we did hear from Joseph Lawson's team as well. And we know that there hasn't been a lot spoken about Joseph during all of this. What did you hear this morning, Alexandra?
Brooke, there hasn't been a lot spoken about Joseph, and this is actually the first thing that Robert Boyd mentions in his closing arguments. He says Steve Lawson's name was mentioned more than Joey. He said that Joseph Lawson didn't even come up until day 3. He sort of paints this picture right off the beginning that, he didn't want to waste the jurors' time. The prosecution didn't want to waste the jurors' time, and he still doesn't want to waste anyone's time right now trying to say that Joseph Lawson really had nothing to do with this. He goes again on what he said during opening statements about God-given common sense, repeats that throughout the closing arguments. He says, quote, "You barely heard from us, probably forgot we were on trial at some point." Again, they're trying to say that Joseph Lawson is such a minor part in this trial. You probably even forgot that we were a part of this. Now, moving throughout his argument here, he again sort of parrots what Brian Butler is saying about the prosecution's case. He says, "I honestly don't know how the prosecution is going to tie this case up. It's very unusual." He says, point blank, Joey Lawson is 100% innocent, and that the evidence that the prosecution laid out throughout the trial is contradictory. He says that even the timing here isn't possible. He brings up some more of those sort of allegations that Kentucky State Police bullied, coerced, intimidated witnesses to try to get statements. He says specifically here on behalf of Joey Lawson. He also says that the Lawsons were already on the fringes of society. He's trying to paint this picture that the two Lawsons were sort of roped into this as prosecutors tried to get Brooks Houck. Now, he says that the reason that Joseph Lawson was pulled into this is that 13-second phone call just after midnight on the night of July 3rd. He says, quote, "I don't even know what was said on that phone call, and frankly, I don't care. You can't resolve a foul up in a 13-second call." Now, he also tries to describe the relationship here between Brooks and the Lawsons, saying that Brooks would never even approach the father and son duo to do this important task because of characteristics they have. He said, yeah, you would not trust this very important task with this father-son duo. One's an alcoholic and one's an alcoholic with drug issues. And he said that sophisticated businessman, being Brooks Houck, did not hire these fools to do it. Now, the last point that I'll make here in the closing arguments for Joseph Lawson is that Robert Boyd really urges the jurors to use the cell phone data as their, quote, North Star to compare the cell phone data against any witness testimony, which he calls, not credible, testimony that's changed over time. So he says, use that cell phone data and you will see that Joseph Lawson was on Boston Road and not on the Bluegrass Parkway where Crystal Rogers' car was left. Brooke.
And of course, what we know is that jurors will not know from the very first trial is that Steve Lawson already admitted to being on the Bluegrass Parkway and admitting to moving Crystal Rogers' car. That's just something that's really crazy with this case, not being able to use that piece of evidence for this trial. Now, once closing arguments wrap up, this case will go to the jurors. We heard that they were given their instructions today, Alexandra, and they can actually adjust the charges a little bit. How does that work?
Yeah, so in the jury instructions, instruction number 4 talks about those adjustments. So in the case of Joseph Lawson, the jury is instructed to find Joseph Lawson either guilty or not guilty on conspiracy to commit murder. Well, if they find Joseph Lawson not guilty on conspiracy to commit murder, they have another option to find him guilty or not guilty on facilitation of murder. It's sort of the same setup here for Brooks Houck as well. So instruction number 4 says, do you find Brooks Houck to be guilty or not guilty of murder? If they find him not guilty, it says, in the case of that, do you find him guilty or not guilty of complicity to murder, which would mean if another person killed Crystal Rogers. If they say he's not guilty of that, then they have the option, do you find Brooks Houck guilty or not guilty of murder, principal, or accomplice? Brooke.
All right. Thanks, Alexandra, so much for all of your coverage the last couple of weeks. We are, of course, committed to bringing you the most thorough coverage of the trial. Our legal analyst, Nick Mudd, joins us daily to break down key moments of the day, along with our Shane McAllister, who has been there since day one. Our Alexander Goldberg right there reporting from Bowling Green. That is every night on the WHAS 11 Plus app at 9 o'clock. You can download that app on your smart TV and watch for free. We'll see you then.